Okay, so it's a serious responsibility. You should, as Angie said, perform that due diligence before serving on the board. Expect time commitment because the organization really needs you. You as a board own the organization. So it's not the executive director or the staff that own it. You are the ones who are responsible for the organization. So some of those responsibilities include establishing the strategic direction, which means the strategic plan, which means focusing on the mission and the vision of the organization. It doesn't mean being down in the weeds on the day-to-day operations. The staff can do that. What you need to do is make sure that the organization is going to be there in 3 years and 5 years. Staff will make sure it's there day to day. But you also want to keep an eye from a strategic level on all those bits of information that they're going to provide to you. Ensure the resources. So again, make an annual donation. I feel very strongly about this, even if you are only able to give $5 a year. As a board member, that shows up on their records. And I served on a board and we had a nun on the board, and nuns are not notoriously rich. They'll pray for you, which we also found a great benefit. But this one nun would give us $25 a year, and that was wonderful. Increasingly, granting organizations, the Community Foundation does this now too, look at the level of board donations. And we want to see that at 90 or 100%. We don't ask for the dollar amount in total or by donor or by board member, but we want to see that everybody is giving to the organization. Because as a grantor, for instance, why would we want to grant money to you if your board is not giving you money? So you have to be passionate about the organization enough to support them. Engage in the fundraising process. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then ensure there's good organizational leadership on both the board and the staff. It's the board's responsibility to get board members. It's not really the staff's responsibility. Now, the staff will play a very important role in perhaps suggesting names and providing information to those potential board members, but it's really the board's responsibility to fill those roles. You need to provide oversight. So establish the policies that provide financial support. Make sure that you're in compliance with the laws and ethical standards, and make sure that you're making progress towards the strategic goals. Ensuring compliance can be, if your organization is large enough to have an audit, look at the audit before it's finalized. Look at it when the audit presentation is made. Look at the 990 before it's submitted. And the executive director or the CEO should run all these things by you, and you should take a look at them. You don't have to be an expert in any of these areas, but you need to at least be engaged in the process. Be an engaged board member. Be strategic, but not operational. So be involved, come to meeting, ask questions, take a look at what information is sent out to you. You have the legal and financial responsibilities of the nonprofit. You have liability issues, which is why Angie strongly recommended you make sure there's D&O or director and officer's insurance. You are responsible to make sure there are appropriate financial and internal control issues. And a lot of times this is difficult with a small nonprofit, especially the segregation of duties in the financial areas. We have a couple of little easy, short write-ups on how to make sure there's segregation of duties, but it's not unusual when an audit is presented to a small nonprofit that that's one of the issues they address. Part of the way that can be resolved is if you only have 1 or 2 staff people, you make sure that at least one board member, probably not their treasurer, but another board member is looking at how the money is coming in, how the money is going out, and takes a regular look at that. We have at our monthly board meetings, we have a board member take a look at every deposit we've made and every check we've written, even if it's, a $50 check. Donors and vendors rely on you as board members to make sure the operation is being run appropriately. We have 3 legal duties, and one is a duty of care, which is the care that an ordinarily prudent person would use, which is saying we want you to be independent in thought. You don't have to be an expert on any of these matters, but we want you to think independently. We want you to come to the board meetings regularly. We want you to be informed about the organization. And if you have a question of the executive director, we want you to follow up and make sure you get the right answer. If you don't get the right answer, if you don't get it in an appropriate time, don't walk in before a board meeting and ask for, the financial information for the last year, but follow up. And if you don't get those responses, that's kind of a red flag you want to look at. You have a duty of loyalty. So you must give your undivided attention to the organization when making decisions for that organization. And this is where a conflict of interest can arise. One of the pieces of information you may be asked to supply after you've agreed to be on a board is a conflict of interest form. And on the 990, they will ask if there's a conflict of interest policy and if the forms have been completed. And it doesn't mean you can't participate. It just means that you're making others aware that you serve on another board, for instance, or perhaps you own a company that has done business with the nonprofit, or perhaps you have a spouse that works for another nonprofit. Doesn't mean you can't participate, just means that you make others aware of it. And sometimes a conflict of interest can arise when you take advantage of property, information, or the assets of an organization. I tell the story that if I were on the board of the food bank, and the food bank has trucks, and if I had a child who was moving in to a dorm room or out of a dorm room, and I asked the food bank if I could borrow their truck because it's not being used on the weekend and I don't want to rent a truck, could I just borrow theirs? That's a breach, because if I'm driving that truck down the street and somebody sees that I am driving the truck and knows that I'm on the board, that is at least a perceived conflict of interest by the person driving the car who might know me. You also have a duty of obedience, and that is to make sure that the organization is obedient to its central purpose, which is reflected in the bylaws and in the mission statement. And again, donors rely on you for paying attention to that. So it is not to say that you can't adjust the mission every once in a while. And here's our friend Ahab looking and saying, well, on second thought, maybe a periodic reassessment of the mission might not be such a bad thing. One of the problems that nonprofits often face is what's called mission drift. A nonprofit might be presented with an opportunity for a grant that is kind of close to what they do, but not exactly, and may pull them away from their direct mission. So I used this example last week with someone from Family Service. So Family Service in Champaign County provides services to families, but primarily to seniors. And so if they had a grant opportunity that said, well, your name is family, so I'm going to give you some money to open a daycare for little kids. That would really take them away from their mission. And while it's hard to say every once in a while no to potential money, sometimes that's the right answer. So you need to take a look at that mission and always keep that as a primary thought. So important things to remember: keep the bylaws up to date and legal. Make sure you pay attention to the financial soundness of the organization, and make sure that the organization's bylaws call for term limits and that they observe those term limits. We're going to talk just a little bit about how you can help with fundraising. Again, Angie mentioned providing entree for the staff to your circle. So, when we can all get together again, or maybe this summer when we can be outside, have a barbecue, have a, tea party, have a cocktail party. Invite some of your friends who you think might be interested in the organization. Invite the CEO just to learn about the organization, to learn more and then become more engaged with the organization. Identify potential board members. Absolutely attend the special events of the organization and invite your friends to do so. If you have the capacity and it's a dinner or something like that, pay for your friends. Invite them to join you that way. And then share your passion for the organization and the mission with people in everyday life. You know, if you're sitting around chatting and somebody says, well, what are you doing? And you'll say, well, my gosh, this week we had the best board meeting you've ever wanted to have. Everybody is engaged. We're all there. Here are the great things that the organization is doing. I cannot say enough about this organization. So share that passion. It won't hurt a bit. Fundraising won't hurt a bit. It could be as simple as adding the nonprofit's website link to your page or to your Facebook page. Tweet about it. Ask. We always ask our board members, and we have several of them who are on the call today, to share things that we post on Facebook or to get the word out about different organizations. So you very likely may have received notice of this meeting from one of our board members sharing that with you. And we appreciate that more than they'll know. So while we encourage best practices, there are some worst practices. And I'll go through these very quickly. So a worst practice is not knowing what the organization does. Sometimes it takes a long time to really understand all the things an organization does. It starts with a good board orientation, and then it continues with listening while you're at the board meeting. While I was on the Community Foundation board, I had no idea all the things they do. Our new board members, and so that was 20 years ago. We do lots more things now. Our newer board members, we have a little session at each one of our board meetings about the foundation, about the things we do, about the organizations we support, about our financial records. Our last meeting was totally focused around our audit and answering questions that come out of that. You want to dive into the operations, or I'm sorry, you don't want to dive into the operation, and you don't want to get too much in the weeds. You're not there to immediately supervise the staff. You only have one staff member, and that's the executive director. You're there to make the organization successful now and into the future. Another thing, if you're not asking questions on a regular basis, you're doing a disservice to the organization and to yourself. So we want you to ask the questions. We want you to understand the financial model of the organization. So we're hopeful that the monthly financial reports that they show you are at a strategic level, not at an operational level. So you don't need to, and this is something I saw on one financial many years ago, was the number of boxes of Kleenex that were used per month. You don't need that level. You need to know how much is being used in the operations, if it's online with the budget, if it's online with what a normal year would provide. There are sometimes when an organization might get a big grant, like $1 million, but it's to be spent over 3 years. So it looks like you have a huge income one year and much lower income the next year. You need to ask a question about that, and you need to keep that in mind. Again, so you can provide that information to other organizations. Don't push your pet projects on an organization. Do participate in the evaluation of the executive director. And don't assume that you know the lives of the members or the clients of your organization. Few of us walk in the footsteps of the people who come to non-for-profits to be served. So remember the duties: care that a normally prudent person would be able to handle, loyalty to avoid those conflicts of interest, obedience to the nonprofit mission, but they also want your ideas. They want your thoughts. That's where that diversity of ideas and thought comes through. They want that from you. And then you can be the most valuable board member on a nonprofit board. Anyone have questions now? Or again, we can take care of those at the end. All right, hearing none, I'll turn it back over to Angie.
All right, thanks. Can you, there we go. Sarah? Hello. Right. Okay, can everyone see that, Angie? Okay. And Dave, are you on with me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Livesey, and Angie introduced us earlier. I'm here today with my board president. This is David Easter with Grand Prairie Friends. And we're going to talk a little bit as we wrap up today's session. We were asked to discuss a little bit about the relationships, more of those intangible pieces, but I would argue one of the most important pieces that keeps your nonprofit engine running. And for us, I think our story is one that is inspirational, hopefully, to other nonprofits who have been in the same situation. So I'm going to actually let Dave kick off and tell a little bit about our journey starting from the beginning.
Hello, everybody. Grand Prairie Friends is a not-for-profit land trust. Our mission is to preserve and restore conservation lands in East Central Illinois. Our mission statement several years ago said we were all volunteer. And after we hired Sarah, we've revised our mission statement to say that we're volunteer driven. The volunteers are still very important, but we couldn't do what we do now without having staff. Grand Prairie Friends started in 1984 with a group of passionate conservationists. They bought a small parcel of land. And for the first many years, the membership, the board, mostly did stewardship. And then we started growing. In 2011, we owned 8 parcels of land and 45 acres. In 2015, we owned 11 parcels of land and 700 acres. Today, we own 19 parcels of land and 1,200 acres. So moving from stewardship on a small number of parcels of land to running a pretty good sized organization now required us to have staff, and we're so glad to have Sarah. In the past, we were a working board. Anything that got done was done by a board member. We wrote the grants, we wrote the burn plans, we executed the burn plans, we did day to day. So in 2016, we talked about bringing staff on. We're a fiscally conservative organization. It worried us. We didn't want to bring someone on and let them go. But we were fortunate in a local community foundation wanted us to grow. They had a partnership they wanted us to participate in. And Lumpkin Family Foundation provided us with a grant to start our growth. And then Illinois Clean Energy Community Foundation provided us a capacity grant. So with that, we searched for staff and we hired Sarah.
And so this is where I come in. So my background had been, as Angie mentioned earlier, for over 20 years, I've worked in and out of conservation nonprofits, various places throughout the United States, even spent some time in Japan. And I can tell you that it doesn't matter where you are, nonprofits face the same issues. Doesn't matter which side of the planet. It doesn't matter if you're concerned about feeding hungry community members, or if you're concerned about preserving critical endangered habitat of a river. It doesn't really matter. What you're dealing with in every case, these relationships are extremely passionate people that are involved in what usually starts off as a grassroots initiative, just as Grand Prairie Friends did and was just explained to you by Dave back in 1984. So through my journeys through the nonprofit world, I did land, luckily, with Grand Prairie Friends in early 2017. As Dave said, they made the decision in 2016. I came on in 2017. But as he said, they were, that word, that term, that's a new $5 term maybe for you, working boards. So you'll hear about working boards and governing boards. Those are fun terms we like to use in nonprofit that just kind of show the stage that the board is in. And so when you think about where your board might be in that lineup, as a staff person coming in, this is maybe the first 2 minutes you want to spend evaluating your new board home, because you want to approach it. That's how your relationship, your foundation of your relationship is going to go. I'm not going to talk to a graduate student that has studied 15 years of biological work at a very basic level, just like I'm not going to do vice versa. You have to know and meet your people where they are, right? And so that's going to set the tone for how you approach everything it is that you are about to do. We can all do the homework, and Joan has done it for us today to know that, you know, the board sets the policy, they set the vision. And then the executive director and the staff, they make that vision come to life. And you share fundraising duties. You have to be fiscally, make sure that you're in charge of the fiscal responsibilities of this organization. But it doesn't always work like that. In a utopia board where rainbows and unicorns live, everybody loves those kind of things, right? And we've all been trained at the nonprofit of fundamentals university, and we all are just ready to jump in. But that's not how it starts all the time. So I encourage you to do a quick nonprofit life cycle analysis to really think about your relationships. So I'm getting back to relationships. This isn't the fundamentals class, I promise. This is a relationship. When you look at your nonprofit that you're about to enter or engage with, whether as a board member or whether as a staff person, where are they? Are they in the startup phase of life, a growth phase, a maturity phase? And you can really go step by step through what is their culture like? What are their finances like? And kind of see where they're at. And then that set my expectations of how I'm going to now interact with my board. Because like I said just a moment ago, in the nonprofit sector, hands down, you're probably going to be working with really passionate people. This is what drove them to work with you in the first place. And sometimes, I know it's so hard to believe, but sometimes when you get a bunch of passionate people in the room, guess what can happen? They can get very passionate in a very disorganized way too, right? And that can come out as a lot of different emotions. So we had to figure out a way that Dave and I came with all this nonprofit information, and I came with all kinds of good tips and tricks, but where was my board? My board was in a growth stage, right? They had been an all volunteer working board. They'd been cleaning the toilets and writing the grants and pulling the garlic mustard and doing the 990 and everything else. And so if I just walked right in there and said, wow, this is not how this is supposed to look, well, I can tell you that that relationship is not on a great track right off the bat. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of how we approached it. All right, so I'll let Dave go now.
So we had to change from a working board, as Sarah mentioned, to a governing board. We're still working on that, but I think we're doing pretty well. In my mind, it's important that we understand that it requires a shift in the mindset, but not the culture. Grand Prairie Friends culture was very good, is very good, and we did not want that to change. We still wanted volunteers. We still wanted to do stewardship. But moving to this type of an organization, we're now having many new opportunities. To get there, we had to update our job descriptions. We had to change our bylaws to include the executive director. And we really did have to focus on fundraising initiatives. We didn't spend much previously. Now having staff, we do have to keep them fed. And we have to keep our properties going. Go ahead, Sarah.
Sure. And so one of the things, as I mentioned, if I just walked in and said, okay, so here's the deal. It says that you're supposed to be fundraising, and it says that, you know, we need to redo the bylaws to include me and all of these wonderful things. That doesn't always fly. And it's being what I say, aggressive, not assertive. We're going to talk about the difference in that relationships on the board here in a minute. But what I found works really well when you're working with these amazing nonprofit, passionate persons is that you don't have to be that dominant voice in the room, but take advantage of local resources so that you are not singled out as this aggressive enforcer of the nonprofit rules. And so I did that in multiple cases and with Grand Prairie Friends by educating. We definitely have fun professional development at the end of every board meeting about what it's like to be a board member. But I think it's also very key to use your local resources. So to not be the only voice. And for us, we use the Community Foundation of East Central Illinois. We were lucky enough that Joan and Angie would talk. We had sessions with the board about what that looks like what should our bylaws look like? What should that look like as we revise the strategic plan? And they helped facilitate those sessions for us so that in a small organization like ours, where I am the only admin professional, I have other voices in the room guiding that discussion. And so that they see it's not just Sarah's got this book of rules, she's going to open the book again, but it's, oh, there's other people that think this way. This is something we should. Here's some of the advantages that the other community members are sharing with us. And then one powerful tool that I say is actually the most powerful tool is to find other colleague models. And if that means that you are working with food insecurity, that you find other food insecurity nonprofits in the state of Illinois. Maybe they're next door in Bloomington Normal. Maybe they're in Southern Illinois, and that you become cohorts with them. You connect your board member team to their board member team, and you have sharing events, and they get to sit and sometimes commiserate about their executive director. Hopefully not. Sometimes they just want to socially interact with each other. And that's what we started to do. We started to connect with other land trusts. And I would have events where we, for example, had a very serious conversation about moving forward with a strategic conservation plan. What that is a document that just says, as a land trust, these are the lands we want to purchase in the future, or we want to preserve and conserve. And so that was a new strategic piece for our land trust, again, because they were caught up in operations and things in the past. So now they were finally having this opportunity to be strategic. And so what does that look like? What did Land Conservation Group did? What did Open Lands Land Trust do? Well, let's have their board members in and let's listen so they don't feel like they're on this journey alone. And so you create this cohort network. And again, so that you're not the only voice in the room as the new administrative professional saying, you need to change. This isn't the way we're supposed to do things. But adapting all these new ideas isn't so scary. When I talk about third-party consultants, that was something that was very important to Grand Prairie Friends. As I mentioned, they were a grassroots organization that had been over 30 years in the making, and they were the doers. This was a working board. And so immediately in that first year, I brought in a fundraising consultant that works specifically with land trusts and said, hey, this is something that board members are supposed to do. It is about loving the land because you're going to make sure there's money in perpetuity to take care of that land. But as some of you mentioned on the call, that's kind of a scary thing. And Joan gave you some great ideas about how we can integrate that in a non-scary way. But it really is about practice. First, it's about someone telling you you can do it, and someone in your community, like for us, the land trust community, saying, you should be doing this as a board member. This is your duty. And then third, it's let's practice. And so we have elevator speeches and we practiced with each other in the room, and we had fake meetings. We had scripts for a while, but we learned together. And so it kind of became a fun adventure that way. Everyone was in the same boat and we all hung on together. And that's what made it work. Again, that third party, that third voice in the room. The same thing we did with our marketing consultant. I had a marketing consultant come in to talk about branding and how important it is, the vision of and how the appearance of the organization looks. Those were things that just didn't have time to do in the past. But now we're getting cleaned up and we're getting in line. And for our third party marketing consultant to come in and share that expertise, and them to really have a new viewpoint about, oh, yeah, this is important. This is why this is important. So I think it's education, but it's also just getting other voices in the room. And I'm trying to slide here. Hold on. Oh, there we go. This is just my last little piece of information before I hand it back to Dave, but I always try to approach my nonprofit boards similarly to with llama. I always like this little acronym because llama are amazingly intelligent animals, as you probably know, and they can also be fiercely territorial. That is why we put them in barnyards often to take care of the coyotes at night and things. And you have to go into that understanding that passion and not be defensive of that passion. They are here because they care about your mission, right? So don't begrudge them that. Let them have that. But at the same time as, maintaining that relationship, you have to at some point meld. So you listen, you learn, you assess. And Dave and I were talking about that the other day, how important really getting to know the culture of the organization was before I came in and made decisions, or how are we going to operate this board. It had to be a partnership. It can't be one person changing things on one end. That's not going to work. But eventually you have to meld, and your board has to come to a relationship where you are working together. But I think only if you start listening, learning, and really do it in a very respectful way will you ever get to the meld part. Or they'll have their defenses up for too long and you won't get there. You'll never get anywhere. That's why this relationship piece, I think, is maybe the most important piece of nonprofit work. I really do. And I had mentioned earlier just being assertive versus aggressive. When you're aggressive, if you look up, there's lots of fun information about this, but being aggressive is just looking at your needs and trying to get your staff goals done. And that's not what being on a nonprofit board is all about. We want to be assertive, both the board and the staff, in getting our goals met as a respectful union, not in an aggressive way where only one person is getting what they need. And then I'll let Dave talk about some of those successes.
So I just saw in the chat, someone said every board needs Sarah Livesey, and I agree with that. We're blessed in that regard. And the board has been able to focus on strategic issues rather than day-to-day issues, and it's made a big difference. We're able to do things that are important to the organization. In the beginning, we were more serendipity, purchasing land. Something came up, it looked good. We thought about it, we looked for grants, etc. But we spent a lot of time developing a strategic conservation plan. And it defines what kind of property are we looking for? What issues should we be looking at? and we are able to define checklists and approaches to moving forward with land. We've had a strategic plan, but we've spent a lot of time on updating the strategic plan. And probably the biggest thing of all is changing to a fundraising culture. We established, well, first off, back in the capacity grant from Illinois Clean Energy, they wisely said that we had to hire a fundraising consultant as part of the grant monies. We would have rather used it elsewhere, but in hindsight, what he told us, we probably knew, but it forced us to really think about and consider approaches moving forward. We established what we call a Blazing Star Society. And it's, previously we had lifetime memberships for $500. That's all we would have forever. Our consultant said that probably wasn't a good idea and challenged us to come up with the Blazing Star Society. That was our name, not his, where we asked members to contribute at least $1,000 a year in an ongoing giving campaign. I thought we would have a couple dozen people, and we're over 50 now. So being mindful, being strategic lets you do much more than I ever thought we would be able to do. Go ahead, Sarah.
And so, yes, we've crossed the rainbow, the nonprofit rainbow. We've made it to, you know, that the mystery land of a working board to a governing board. And I just had a moment with my board the other day, and I said, look at you. Like we all stuck it out together for the past 3 years. This has been a long 3 years of transition. Everything from branding, marketing, the fundraising culture, all of that has changed. Their daily life as a board member has completely changed. And it, as Dave said, we've come out on the other side. They have more time to be more strategic. They have staff taking on the operations, and it didn't happen overnight. And no one should expect that, because you want this to be a respectful transition, but still remain, as I said, assertive in that these are the goals and this is where we need to get, but just getting there in a more respectful way. And so now we are at a place where the board vision is what they talk about at board meetings. It is very structural, it's in and out, and then the staff moves on those actions and fulfills that vision through work plans, research, action on the grant, you know, on the ground, grant writing, all of the things that staff are supposed to do. So it's really a very exciting time for us. And I even mentioned to my board, and I'm going to be very honest, you know, and when other boards have gone through these transitions, there sometimes is people leave, right? That's just, and that's okay, because that probably was what's best for that person and what's best for that board. When change happens, there will be those that just resist to meld. There's my word again. Not one of my board members left. And to me, that just shows that they are in it for the true mission of what our organization is. As Dave said earlier, our culture didn't change. And that's what's important for people to keep a finger on, is that you're not trying to alter the mission and the culture of your organization. So with that, in the end, yes, we knew the best practices going in, but we knew resources in the community and used them. And eventually we, you know, above all, I think we identified our relationships and how to respectfully make this transition. And so those were our tips. So any questions if there's time or anything like that? Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Sarah and Dave. You did a great job. As Angie mentioned, we're going to make these resources available to you because we have your email addresses now because you registered. But do you have any questions now that we could address?
I have a question, Joan, about strategic plans and specifically how to create those. What are the best elements or of a strategic plan? If there are any good examples online of nonprofit strategic plans that we could reference, anything you can have to fill out the gaps there in terms of how to proceed on.
Sure, Travis, and we'd be happy to get you some of those things. It basically starts with an assessment of the organization right now and where you want to be in 3 to 5 years. And so the strategic plan offers you the pathway to get there. But there are some good templates for that kind of thing, and we'll be happy to make that available to you.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
You bet.
I have a question, Ed Pierce here. I guess this is for Sarah. In that transition going from working board to a governing board, what if the situation I run into is that a board I've been asked to be a member of is very much a working board, and the staff, what little staff there is, just one person, is quite happy with the board doing all the work. But I don't want to. so how would I move as a board member? How would I kind of move that transition along?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I would start, just as I said, maybe not in an aggressive way, but in an assertive way, just introducing those ideas, maybe those frameworks of what a healthy board, a robust board looks like. And, we've shown you quite a few of those resources today, but just knowing that it's not coming from Ed, it's coming from the best practices of nonprofit world, right? This is where we're going to get the most effective use and serve our clients, is if the board is at a policy level and these are the things we need to do. But I think, Ed, maybe even digging back a little further, you may need to really think about the foundation of funding, right, for staff, to get those other staff pieces. So maybe it's taking 2 steps back before you can hope to get, if there's not enough staff to do the work, that's the hard part. And that's what Dave was talking about with us. That was really the leap off point for us, where everything changed, was when the board was able to secure those funds from a family foundation to pay for the executive director for a year, right? To get that on the ground. So maybe it's something like you have to first do the homework to find the capacity and the funding to get that staff in place, so that then you can move on. That might be one, and that's just my suggestion. Joan, Angie may have others, but I think you might have to take 2 steps back before worrying about that.
Terrific, thank you.
Sarah, can I add on to the question? This is Thomas Warda. So I'm a member of the Preservation and Conservation Association in Champaign. And there is more board members than there are staff. And there's a lot of things the board wants to do. We want to solve all the possible problems that are out there in the world having to do with our mission, which I'm sure many people can understand. So I totally understand what you're saying in that, trying to back off that, well, we can't just put all the board members to work. We really have to get the board members working to get funds and to really be that governing board, even though we can't accomplish all the things we want to do right now. Is that the message to take? To be like, we can't do this year. We have to bring ourselves towards fundraising.
Yes. And honestly, when you sit down and you have your strategic plan and you do your ranking and you look at what are our priorities. So as a nonprofit, you may have emergent situations. So you may have COVID and you may have to feed children that aren't getting fed at school right now, right? So as a nonprofit, you may have emergent things that you have to attack. But hopefully the strategic plan gives you your big picture things and you can focus more on those. And yes, take a step back to get the fundraising you need, to get the staff in place to eventually get to that point. Yeah.
Yeah, Sarah, I would agree that that would be an organization that could benefit greatly from a strategic plan. Seeing what you accomplish or want to accomplish this year, next year, 3 years down, and how you're going to do it, what funding sources, what other resources you need to accomplish that along the way. And, you know, the funding and what you want to do come hand in hand, because you're not going to attract a grant unless you can give them a powerful story of what you're going to accomplish. So I agree with you.
We'll stay on to answer any more questions that any of you might have, but we want to be conscious of our time here. It's 1:15. Thank you all for coming today. Hopefully each of you took a little something or a couple of somethings from our presentation. We'll be following up in the coming days with interested attendees to work with you one-on-one to identify your interests and your professional skills and ways that you could fit a role on one of our local nonprofit partners boards. So we're excited about all of you being here. What a great community we live in that so many of you have interest in serving in this way. So thank you again. And like I said,
Oh, I'm sorry.
we'll stay on to answer any questions too.
You had your hand up.
Yeah, and actually, I think what Angie was saying, that was kind of my question. I'm coming into being the president of the board for Sinai Temple, and I would really love it if we could get some help on kind of creating a updated mission statement and purpose. And, you know, so I'm hoping maybe that's something that we can work together and get, you know, get some of you fantastic people in to help us with.
Happy to do that. We do that through our Center for Nonprofit Excellence every day, and we're happy to connect and help you with that.
Great.
Anyone else? No?
All right. Well, thank you all for your willingness to learn how to be better board members and what to think about as you are asked or you ask to be on a board.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.